Welcome to this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through the industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Parker Harris, founder and president of Junto Global, a mastermind platform for entrepreneurs and leaders who work together to take their life and business to the next level. Welcome to the show, Parker.
Thank you, AJ.
You are welcome. You are welcome to the show. You are welcome to India. And I'm sure a lot of people will benefit out of somebody like who is a mastermind of mastermind. So first, to understand from you, Parker, is exactly what is a mastermind? And in this mastermind, who teaches and who learns?
That's a great question. So a mastermind, the definition that I first heard that still resonates with me is when two or more minds come together in the spirit of harmony to accomplish a similar goal. And then as far as your second question, like who teaches, who learns, I think this goes back to even why I started Junto and when I started to really learn, like value masterminds was before that I was putting on a lot of speaker events where I'd bring in an entrepreneur, an investor, an executive to speak to like in a professional development capacity. And over time, I started seeing less and less value from that. Hearing what worked 10 years ago or 30 years ago. And instead, before those events or after those events, I was talking to peers about like, what's working for you now to solve this problem that I have. And there's another saying, like when one person teaches, two people learn. So I think in a mastermind environment, it's like almost contextual mentorship where we all have something to contribute to each other and we all have something to receive from each other. And a big part of the value of a mastermind, I think, is really figuring out what is root cause, like what is the real problem? What is the real question that we need to answer? And then how do we answer that question?
Okay. In terms of your mastermind, it's a mastermind for entrepreneurs and leaders. So what is the constitution of your mastermind, just to get a better idea, especially for people who may be interested in your kind of mastermind?
Yeah, I would encourage anyone listening to form their own mastermind. There's sometimes a joke that the only mastermind most people form is in their marriage, right? That's where like two or more minds are coming together in the spirit of harmony to accomplish a goal. As far as the constitution of ours, we have a sacred cow around vulnerability. So we're really urging leaders and entrepreneurs to come as their real self without a mask or even an agenda. We're not creating an environment for people to sell to each other or sometimes people will do business with each other, but that's not the main purpose of the mastermind. It's all about putting the other person's best interests at heart and serving them with whatever, and this is my wording, is whatever is authentically relevant to them. And part of that is the discovery. And then from there, we work to connect people to peers, mentors, resources, and experiences that will help them achieve their goals.
Okay. So, for example, if there is a say meeting happening, and I don't know how many numbers, what's the number of people in your mastermind, but generally entrepreneurs or anybody else may have that tendency to just try and get more business out of these meetings, and then generally people use these as networking places. So is it how would you put it and how do you ensure that these places not just become networking or business lead generation places, and rather become places where people can get their larger issues of business and entrepreneurship solved from the people who actually know how to solve them? How do you ensure that part when whereas all these people are generally quite, they know about entrepreneurship, they know about business, they are leaders. So it can sometimes be difficult to maintain that decorum in this sort of a mastermind.
Yeah, so there's a few questions there. As far as the size of one of our mastermind meetings is, we'll work to have 8 to 12 people in a meeting. I sometimes feel like 12 might be a little too many, so we've started to go more towards 8 to 10. With that being said, we've had some really great meetings with 3, 4, 5 people because there's a little bit more back and forth. Um, and then a big part of the value that we create is the curation. We're curating people coming in to make sure they're coming in for the right reasons, and their business is at a point where we can really like serve them and add value to them. If someone's part of an MLM or a service-based business where it's pretty obvious that they're just trying to get business, we won't allow them into our mastermind. So I think there is like a filter element. And there's so many different networking events, and I'm not against them. I used to attend a lot of networking events because that old cliche, our network is our net worth. And when I was just starting out, I didn't really have a large network yet. And then as I attended more of those events, one, I was able to meet people that I wanted to stay connected with. And sometimes it can be difficult to build that relationship where you meet someone, you're like, oh, I want to get to know you more. Let's get coffee. We'd get coffee next week. And then we try to, get that recurring, something again in the future, but usually that fizzles out over time. And that's one of the values of this type of structure is we're getting together on a frequent basis, and that frequency is built into it. So I think we were solving some of the problems that are created from networking events. And then on the negative side of the networking event is like when someone's just there to sell you something, insurance, or a real estate agent just wanting to sell a house. You can kind of feel it when someone asks you, okay, like the first question is usually like, what do you do? Right? And then if you don't answer that question correctly, they just start looking over at like who's the next person they're going to talk to. And I think that's a pretty like superficial environment, where a mastermind environment is really like, who are you? What do you enjoy doing? What are you passionate about? And in that environment, you can usually tell what someone's motives are over time. And people that are coming, just to pull from that environment generally don't get a lot out of it. But people that are really coming to authentically contribute to that environment tend to get more out of it, whether it's relationships, whether it's growth and learning, and even business.
Okay. And what are the type of issues that come up for discussion? How does it work? Is it some sort of a round table? Is it a very comfortable atmosphere you have meetings in at a particular place, which is like a conference room? How does it, and how do you conduct that for a general person who has never been to a mastermind like that? How does it actually work on the ground, and who initiates it? Is there an agenda that is shared earlier, that okay, this is the type, this is what we will discuss? Is there a time frame? Is there a particular issue either somebody will raise by themselves, or you bring it up as the one who conducts it? You act as a referee. How does it work? Take us down at the ground level so that we can understand exactly how these masterminds actually function at the ground level.
Yeah, you might have to ask me some of those questions again. I'll try to answer as many of those as I can. But I think from like a more high level, we don't look at it as like a linear path where there's like a meeting and then there's a next meeting. It's more of a loop, if you will, like an iteration loop, where we get together, and I'll go more into that. And then in between the meeting, we'll apply what we learned, and we'll communicate with each other. More topics will come up, and then we'll come back together for the meeting. And that happens, we at this point we do it on a monthly basis. And many of our members have been with us for 5-7 years. So they've really gotten to know each other in a way where there's a lot of trust, there's a lot of awareness of each other. So the feedback that people are able to provide is almost like surgical, right? Where it's like, hey, I've heard you say this 3 times now, and I've noticed that there's a limiting belief that's deeper there. And then one of the things that we normally see is the problem that an entrepreneur thinks they have is usually a business issue. And it's usually like, I don't have enough customers, right? Or I don't have
Right.
enough
Right.
sales. But usually there's something that's much deeper than that, that's potentially not even a business issue. That's maybe more of a mindset or a personal development issue. One of the, different masterminds have different focuses. Our focus is more holistic. So we do focus on business. We also focus on health, relationships, and impact. And for us, the core to that is personal development. So we have a personal development focus, but we allow people to zero in or to hone in on what's most important to them at that time, and then we'll figure out if that's true. Sometimes we see that entrepreneurs' priorities are
Right.
backwards. As far as the length of time of a meeting, I'd recommend a mastermind be anywhere from like 2 to 4 hours. So it's a fairly significant investment of time, and sometimes those can be led by a facilitator. I'm sometimes wary because I've seen masterminds turn into group coaching, and I think there's a core difference between group coaching and masterminds. And a big part of the value of a mastermind, again, is like helping people identify what is the topic or question that would create the most leverage for them. Sometimes the way I word it is like, what's the question that you'd spend $10,000 to answer? Like, what's the question you'd spend $100,000 to answer? And if people don't know that question, then it's impossible to get it answered. It is a roundtable environment, so there's no like hierarchy within that type of environment. It's like Knights of the Round Table stuff where we're all equals and everyone is expected to contribute and be a full participant. There's no one that's like standing there observing. And we normally started off with setting the intention for that meeting, like getting people in state, anchoring it in vulnerability, even confidentiality, because it's important for people if we're really asking them to bring their real problem. Entrepreneurs often don't have people they can talk to about what's really going on because there's usually complex stakeholder relationships within their team, their families even. And there's a lot of like sayings, right? Like it's lonely on top or whatever. And, sometimes that, a lot of times that's true. And so creating a space for people that are leading their business or leading their movement to be around other people that really understand what they're going through, it tends to create a lot of value just having that shared understanding. And last point I'll make on this is you said something about like, is this like a really comfortable environment? I think a mastermind is generally meant to make people uncomfortable, right? It's like growth. Like the gym is not, if you're going in there and it's just comfortable, then there's probably not a lot of gains that are happening from it. And it's the same with a mastermind environment where we're trying to get people to feel comfortable being uncomfortable, because that tends to add a lot more value to them than just like being like, oh yeah, everything's going to be okay, you're doing great, right? Like there's not a lot of value that's created from that. And so then after we set the state for the meeting, we'll have people share updates of like the things that are going well, their highs, their lows, their wins, and the things that they think they need support on. And we'll look for topics from that. And then the way that I think about it is like, we create a structured, unstructured conversation to talk about the things that are most relevant to us. And we do have some success principles that we use in our meetings, so that it doesn't become this like advice giving or like, oh, you should do this, right? Because when someone tells me what I should do, I don't normally respond very well. I think I'm a little bit stubborn in that way. So I want to hear what other people, have gone through. And part of this too is like connecting people on an emotional like level too, right? Is like help, it's pretty easy to be in our heads, and it's like, oh, like this is obviously the problem, this is obviously the solution, but actually like, oh, hey, I'm experiencing fear from you, or I'm experiencing like frustration, and I remember when I felt that way, and this is how I dealt with it. So that's some of the kind of tools that we use to create a space where people can hear the truth within themselves versus being told what to do. And then we'll close out the meeting in an intentional way of really figuring out like what was the most valuable things we talked about and what are you going to do with it. So this is an action focused group, and then we start looking for like topics for the next meeting. What do you guys want to talk about next time? How can we make the meeting better? And looking for opportunities to challenge each other. I think again that goes back to the being comfortable being uncomfortable, because I think entrepreneurs tend to have a mindset where they're not committed to the stories that they're telling themselves, or they're not committed to like just feeling comfortable and they have everything perfect. They're like, no, like I want to grow, and there's some that's biblical like scripture stuff right there, but it's there's a certain amount of wisdom that someone has when they want to be corrected, or they want to be like see the error in their ways versus think that they're doing everything correctly.
Right, Parker. So you talked about the $10,000 figure. So people, these are very. So you need to figure out what exactly one must can ask in this situation, and they have to know beforehand. So how does an entrepreneur know exactly what problem he's facing? Sometimes you see, one can be a very just struggling entrepreneur, and they may be too much deep into their whole business entrepreneurship stuff, so it will be very difficult for them to figure out, or those general questions again will be, how do I grow my business, how do I deal with this problem? And the other is that larger entrepreneurs who have achieved a certain level of success, and then they may have problems not also only about business but also about life, and there can be a lot of noise around them, and that it can become difficult for them to actually get that perspective, either in terms of the bottom line, the profits, as well as in terms of a lot of people want to achieve that spiritual level of growth, that self actualization. So how do they know what they don't know? Who helps them? Because in the mastermind there are masters who can help them, but only if they are able to put that question forward. How do you see that? What are the issues that come up in your mastermind?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. We've developed a framework that that is fairly detailed into personal development and business to help people think accurately about both the personal development journey and the business journey. So some of the things that are included in our framework for personal development is like trigger processing, right? Business is a place where people can get triggered, where there's a lot of fires. How do we use that for our benefit to understand the story that we're telling ourselves? And that relates to identity, that relates to what is our why, our beliefs, our vision, our habits, our community, our success team. So those are most of the elements of our personal development framework. And then we also have a business framework that stacks on top of that. And throughout the month, in between meetings, I do one-on-one calls with the members of a mastermind to create a loop of like, okay, this was your intention item. Are you doing it? What's going on? What's coming up for you? And really figuring out what is the most valuable thing to bring to the table to create the most leverage for them. And at this point, I've led, 3 to 4,000 mastermind meetings over the last 10 years. So I've been able to start seeing patterns, and it's come up for me many times where the problem that I think I have is not the problem. So we work in between the meetings to use our frameworks and mental models to help identify what is that question. And then 20 or 30% of the time in the meeting, we still figure out that that's not the right question, that there's something deeper going on there. And frankly, that's not just a business phenomenon. I think that also happens in relationships too. Relationships are probably just as challenging as business, if not more, right? And so a lot of times in a relationship, what we think is the problem is the other person, you know,
Right.
and often, you know, there's something deeper there that you know is true. And the same with health, right? Being healthy. There's sometimes identity issues there. There's belief issues. There's the how. How do I even do it? Um, so I don't know if that answered your question, but that's what came up for
Yes,
me.
yes, indeed, you have answered it very well. And other questions also. I sometimes tend to ask a couple of questions at the same time. Sometimes I know these people are all experts, and these questions are interrelated, so they can put together and answer them at your own pace. But you answered them all very well, Parker. My next question to you is that, as an entrepreneur, whoever, either your mastermind or any other mastermind, if they go to a mastermind like that, uh, how can they get the best out of such a mastermind from an entrepreneur point of view? What would you advise them as the owner of a mastermind yourself?
I would say to first Google their question. You know what I mean? Like ask Chat GPT the question. Like do with the work that they can do themselves. And I think that that's another interesting thing is when is someone ready for a mastermind? And I like this idea that people are ready for a mastermind when their problems are no longer Googleable. You know, so many problems are Googleable or Chat GBTable, and and you know, a lot of people want someone else to do that work for them, right? Like I remember meeting with a mentor and I was asking him some questions and he's like, let me Google that for you. You know, and I was so embarrassed that I started like learning to Google for myself, like the things that were relevant to me. And I frankly think that's a skill that's not taught in school very well, is like teaching someone to solve their own problems. At a certain point in someone's journey as an entrepreneur, as an executive, as a leader, they're not going to be able to solve their own problems because it's like there's a Mark Twain quote that's at the beginning of that movie The Big Short. It's that it's not what you don't know that's going to hurt you, it's what you know that isn't so. And so I think that there's an element of like sometimes we think we know something that isn't true and we need to be challenged, or we need someone to point out that blind spot, and we need that to be someone that we respect, someone that's a peer, someone that's, you know, um, that's gone what we've gone through or is going through what we're going through. I think that it's interesting. You know, I'm really excited to do this podcast with you because I think that India is a culture where masterminds could really work, because there's a certain amount of like openness and I don't know. Um, I think it could really work there. Where there's some cultures where masterminds can't work because people are always putting up like a face, right, or a facade that's not true, a mask, and it's very difficult to get value from a mastermind if you're not willing to show up with vulnerability and who you are. So I would say first Google it. You're try to solve your own problem. Come with those options to a mastermind. It's like, hey, this is my problem. I've thought about this a lot, right? This isn't my first time thinking about it. And these are 3 to 5 options that I have to solve the problem, and to be vulnerable with the group. This is what I've tried. This is what's failed. I think sometimes things get called a mastermind that aren't a mastermind too, as well. Like there's a lot of like conferences or events that get called a mastermind that are just networking environments or like pitch environments, or again group coaching, right? And so again, a mastermind is a round table where there isn't like one expert who's leading there or one mentor. Um, and so, you know, I think the last piece of this, just to kind of put a bow on it, is come to a mastermind to contribute to other people. Like it's just not about me, or it's not about you. It's not about like, oh, I have this one thing, I'm just coming to get this solved. It's like, hey, I do have something I do want to receive from this, but I'm also want to contribute. I want to genuinely contribute to the success of the other people there, whether that's connecting, making an introduction for them, whether that's sharing a resource with them, whether that's challenging them. But you know, I think it's a spiritual thing, but I think people can feel that type of energy, and when someone wants to contribute and when someone's actually adding value, other people want to add value to them.
Right, right. One thing I wanted to understand from you, Parker, is that you see, a lot of times in our lives, and even as an entrepreneur, you can have a lot of unnecessary people around you, and it's very difficult to manage. You at the age of 23, after you almost had had a very difficult car accident, and as you say, you almost died, and then you got that perspective and removed a lot of unnecessary people from your life, and you started afresh. Now an entrepreneur does not have to go through that, but what can they learn from you? What would you like to tell them, how they can remove a lot of things from their lives and actually get to the focus of entrepreneurship and living life to the fullest? How can an entrepreneur do that? Is it possible for them? And you are the best person to say it, because you have seen this, done this in your own life at a very early age.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. I like the way, um, entrepreneurship can be a lonely journey, and I think just being unique and different inherently, there's not a lot of people like us, and I was different from the other kids I went to school with, and it made me feel very lonely, and I eventually started seeking connection in very negative places, and and that led to me almost dying, and I remember realizing like the people that I surrounded myself with were taking advantage of me and didn't have my best interest in mind. Um, and so I needed to walk those people out of my life, and I was very intentional about that. And it was very lonely for 6 to 12 months. Um, and I think to answer your question, well, let me just finish that. So it was very lonely for 6 to 12 months, and then I was very careful on who I let into my life after that. And I looked for quality people that were also different and unique and on their own journey and interested in learning, interested in building things. And I started to bring those people into my life, and that void naturally creates space. And at that point, I think I also accepted myself. Um, Let me go back to that. So those people that I started letting into my life, they became my mastermind. That became my business. It became something that was almost sacred to me, just where I saw so much value. So I think entrepreneurs often solve their own pain, and so you know a lot of people I think want to numb their pain or cover up their pain or hide from their pain. But if we can get really real about our pain, it can become a solution that other people can utilize too. And so now, that's become a big reward for me, is the awareness that I had of my pain and exploring the solutions and finally finding one and then sharing that solution with the world. And I think that, that's probably the hero's journey in a lot of ways. And it's part of the entrepreneurial journey as well. Um, to how does someone walk themselves out of their life, like how do people clear that out of their life, is I think one is accepting themselves, like not thinking that there's something wrong with them because they're different, right? I think almost all entrepreneurs are different. Like normalcy is almost the problem. I don't know exactly how it is in India, but in America, it is normal to be broke, it is normal to be overweight, it is normal to be divorced, it is normal to spend most of your, it's the normal is not something that I aspire to. And so I think embracing what makes us different, and then being real with ourselves on who is bringing us energy versus who's taking us energy. Like what is this relationship serving me, is a way that sometimes I think about it. And Gary Vaynerchuk, who's a very popular entrepreneur in the United States, and I think globally as well, he talks a lot about essentially removing negative energy from negative relationships from our lives, whether it's our mother, whether it's our brother, whether it's a friend. There are certain people that we've grown with that we're no longer growing with. And I think that that's okay, right? And it does, and I'm not saying like necessarily like the way that he says it too, right? Is like, I'm not saying cut your mother out of your life. I'm saying talk to her less, you know? So I think there's ways to build boundaries with people that can serve us. One of the godfathers of masterminds, his name was Napoleon Hill. And one of the ways that he described this was there should be, I think, like three levels of walls around us. And the outermost level is a very low wall with many holes in it, and that anyone that has a reasonable request in our time can enter into it. Then from there, there's another level of wall where it's a really high wall and there's only one way in, and that's the inner circle that we are intentionally letting people into that level. And then from there, there's one more wall, and those walls go all the way up, and there's no way in. And that's just like, and the only thing that's in that is us and the divine. So I think as I was an only child, and I had good parents that made me like have a good outlook on the world and want to care about other people. And I wasn't good at setting boundaries up. I let people all the way in, and I let their judgments of me become my judgments of myself. And that didn't serve me. And so, I think part of that entrepreneurial journey is learning to trust ourselves, learning to figure out who we are. And there's a lot of power in that.
Right, Parker. Right. Good to hear. All those thoughts, the journey that you have been. And one thing I can know is you have always had the good at heart for a lot of people. And even at the age of 17, you started your own company, became a board member for nonprofits, and even the president of the United States, he recruited you to speak at leadership conferences. So obviously, if the president of your country sees something good in you, I'm sure they do a lot of due diligence on that. And so that way you have a lot of learning, and that you could, and then you could have then modeled your mastermind and named it after yourself. You modeled it after, or even on Napoleon Hill, but you modeled it after Benjamin Franklin. Help us understand that thought. I'm sure it's a very intellectual mind working behind all these thinking.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear that journey, right? Because I think it's definitely not a linear journey most of the time. And I once heard it said, like, some people think that success is like one direction and failure is the other direction, and that's not true. Usually, success is on the far side of failure. So I've definitely failed a lot in my life, and then I got through that, and it started leading to success. And I think that's one of the things that school does wrong, right? Where it's like failure is a bad thing, and the goal is to get 100%. But entrepreneurship, there's no way to get to success without embracing failure. And, good entrepreneurs are right like 30 to 60% of the time. And like in school, that's an F, right? So I think it takes a certain mindset shift to go from being good at school to being good at entrepreneurship. It's like two different games, like very different games. I started reading a lot at a young age. Like I just started finding personal development books and really like enjoying them. And I also started organizing a lot of events that were more professional development focused. So I wasn't like organizing parties as much as I was organizing, like I said, speaker events where I'd bring in successful people, entrepreneurs, investors, executives to speak and share their journey with us. And I organized probably 100, 150 of those events. And at the same time, I started reading Benjamin Franklin's autobiography, which is a phenomenal book. It was actually the first autobiography ever written. And in that autobiography, he talks about two main things that had a huge impact on him. And one was he created a list of moral virtues and a system for mastering those. And the second was he organized something called Junto, which means to join together. And it was Benjamin Franklin's mastermind of 12 industrious people that would come together to talk about business and science and technology. And, that led him to doing, not only succeeding in business, but also having a massive impact on the community. That group specifically, not just him, created the first public library, the first post office, the first fire department, the first public hospital. And some people would say even the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States came out of those type of conversations, things like the separation of powers and how the government's structured. So it has a huge legacy that really impacted our nation and was very inspiring to me. And as I started organizing those speaker events, and I started seeing less value from like the speaker and more value from the peer-to-peer exchange, I decided to invite that group of people together for Junto, which, a roundtable conversation. And there was no business involved. It wasn't like a business idea at the time. It was just me solving my own need, something that I saw value in. And I did that for 3 or 4 years. And it created a lot of value for the other people that were involved. It created some value for the entrepreneurial ecosystem in the city that I lived. And over time, I was like it was actually in a Junto meeting. We were discussing this idea of like, how do we figure out our purpose? How do we figure out our passion? How do we figure out the thing that, we're meant to do? And another member shared that passion is not the thing that we love doing. It's not the thing that we would do if we had $1 billion or $1 million in the bank and we could do whatever we wanted. What passion was the thing that we're willing to suffer for. And that really hit me. And I was like, well, what am I willing to suffer for? Like, I live in San Diego, like Southern California. It's a beautiful place. I have a great job. I have a great life. And I don't suffer for a lot of things, so what was I willing to suffer for? And it was 2 things. It was making good food and good drinks for the people that I cared about. And it was Junto. And so I decided to go all in on those 2 things. I became the COO for a cocktail company, a mixology company, excuse me. And then I started growing Junto. And over time, I decided to go all in on Junto and let go of the mixology piece of it. And I'm very grateful kind of for that journey. It felt like a life or death decision to leave working. I was working for a Fortune 100 technology company at the time. And, I even told friends and mentors that I was going to do this. And they're like, you're crazy. But I was fortunate to have met the founder of that Fortune 100 company. And he told me that everyone told him that he was crazy too when he was starting it. So I think that if it was obvious, everyone would have already done it. So sometimes, we have to embrace, the crazy and come and utilize the fear to hone our senses, to really bring the most out of us from an intellectual standpoint, and then be willing to make the mistakes and fail forward.
Right. There is so much to, you have, is there that you offer to people, not only to entrepreneurs, but there is so a lot of wisdom in your life, in your understanding. But I'm sure this is just a podcast show. For a lot of things, people will have to come and connect with you. So how do people connect with you so that they can learn more from you, about you, and also how can entrepreneurs connect with Junto Global?
So AJ, I'm being more active on social media these days. So I'm on LinkedIn as Parker Harris, Instagram as Zach, ZAC _Parker _Harris. So I'd encourage them to connect with me on social media, and I'm sharing more and more of my journey on a daily basis there. And then our website for Junto is junto.global. And they can check out what we're doing there, and there's an option for them to connect with us there as well.
Right. My last question to you, Parker, are just a couple of these. One is for somebody who almost lost his life at the age of 23. How do you look at your journey, and what is it that you seek yourself in terms of who have seen life from so close and also death from so close? Second part is that as the mastermind or masterminds, if a problem comes to you, who do you go to? Help us in this. That's my last question.
Yeah. So one of my favorite quotes is life is not a problem to be solved, but an adventure to be lived. So I think I was, in school, it's all about solving problems, right? And getting 100%. And an adventure is a much different thing. And an adventure is about accepting the ups and the downs and almost evolving, like with that, adapting. So, I try to I look at it life as an adventure as much as I can and realize that I've already been through so much, right? It's like it's not about the path that lies ahead of me as much as like that gives me the faith as much as like the path that lies behind me and realizing I can get through anything. Um so that gives me more faith and trust, which I think is something that I struggled with for a long time was learning to I was basically telling myself a story that because of mistakes that I already made, I couldn't be who I wanted to be. And that's just such a disempowering story. And instead learning to have faith and trust that I was on the right path and that I was where I needed to be is so much more empowering and frankly wastes a lot more time. Or excuse me, wastes a lot less time and a lot less energy. Um, and then second question, who do I go to is um, there's a lot of I'm because of what my business is, it ends up bringing a lot of quality peers into my life, and because of the value that we create, a lot of those people want to add value back to me and support me. And so I'm lucky enough to have a lot of peers who for whatever reason were able to move faster than me or to get to places that I aspire to get to that want to bring me along, that want to help me to get there. And I think that's part of like learning to add value to other people is that those people usually want to add value back to you. And then I've also collected mentors my entire life. I've been looking up to people that were achieving goals that I wanted to achieve. But I also want to share this idea of like sometimes that doesn't serve me, like having all these mentors and peers that I can ask to, because it stops me from solving the problem myself. And everybody has an opinion, right? There's a lot of sayings around that. And usually what's interesting about business is usually a lot of those different things can work, right? Like ads can work, putting out organic content can work, SEO can work, like just in how to get new customers, like anything can work, but it's a matter of like, what am I willing to commit to and fail through and get good at and put in the time. So I've actually been trying to, one is only talk to people that have that recent and relevant experience with multiple demonstrated successes in the problem that I have to solve. And then really figuring out like learning to trust myself and find the answers within myself versus always looking externally for those answers.
Wonderful. Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you, AJ. I hope to become part of your community if you're open to it. So I'll follow up with you.